So, Sean, you're back in the Emmy race this year for Jessica Jones. It took about 3 years between seasons one and season two.
Yeah.
I know that fans of the show were really excited for it to come back. But how about you? I mean, were you excited to finally get to start work on it again after this long gap?
Yes. it, it was a long time. I mean, I wanted it to come back literally the next year, but they had to write this unique story, as many of your fans would know of the show. They introduced Jessica's mom, and they went very deep with the relationships between her and her mother, Trish and Jessica. You know, some really rich female relationships got explored, and there was a bit of time there. So when we got the first show last fall or last summer, I was very excited because I had not seen the show. I'd not seen the sets. I'd not seen Miss Ritter in a long time. So when we got back, I think everyone was very, very excited. And we're very happy that the distance between season 2 and season 3 is going to be, shorter. So as a matter of fact, in a week from today, I look at the first episode of season 3. So.
Oh, well, good to know. Now, you actually won an Emmy for the first season of the show. It's your 4th career Emmy. So tell us a little bit about that night and what that win meant for you, your win for this show.
Well, there are 6 music categories in the Academy, and the one that I submitted Jessica for was for the main title, and I was really just so thrilled to get the nomination, because there are now hundreds of submissions in the Emmys this year, and it's growing because of streaming media and all the great television out there. So you have, I think this year it's 775, something like that, submissions. So that Emmy for Jessica was really special. It was for the main title. I'd never submitted in that category before. This year, the nomination was for the underscore, which was really, truly special and very unexpected, because it's more of an understated jazz, intimate, personal score. So, and there's so much good music and so many good nominees in my field. So, but listen, when you're not, I've said this in a couple of to people lately. It's true. I've had the blessing of being nominated a few times, but you honestly just don't expect it. You don't expect it, especially when my wife and I are watching some of these shows on TV, and you're like, oh, that's a great score. That's going to get nominated, And then I think, is that limited series or regular? Like, you start thinking, could you submit? You see all this great music, so you don't expect it. You don't expect when you get it, and when you do, it's sort of brand new. So it's exciting.
So between seasons 1 and season 2, how did the music evolve or change? Did it evolve or change at all? Or how did you grow upon what you had done in season 1?
Well, it's a great question. I would say the overall difference between season 1 and season 2 is season 1, the first season always has the expositional elements of the story. You're seeing the person in her office for the first time. Everything is new. And the challenge of a sophomore season is, well, how do you break new stories and keep yourself still connected to the DNA of the original season that you fell in love with? And one of the, I think probably, though I never spoke to Melissa Rosenberg, our showrunner, about this, but we had such a great villain in the first season in the form of David Tennant as our purple, our mind controlling villain, Kilgrave. But the departure of going into the stories of Jessica's origins, how she became who she is, her mother, the complexity of that relationship, how there's so much love for a person and yet there's so much friction, how there's, we all have, most of us hopefully, have parents, so we understand that the complexity and telling a story like that is so hard, but it's beautiful. And then Hogarth's vulnerability in the next season, there was a vulnerability in that character that we'd never seen before. So I would say the biggest difference was that we were exploring deeper these wonderful characters that were created in season 1. And I really didn't know where it was going to take us. There were some darker moments in Jessica's past that emerged that even, when I look at a show, when I look at the first episode, I look at it for the first time with everybody in the room, the producers and so forth. And so I have a reaction like a fan does. Like when you see someone comes out, or if you see the revelation of the mother when she reveals her, you're like, oh, you feel these very visceral, very honest things. And I write down and I remember these feelings so that I can begin to sort of chart and plot the course of how the show might sound. So I would say I would say tonally, in terms of her world, the jazz kind of hybrid neo component was maintained, but even more evolved. But you had to follow the evolution of the characters. Malcolm had a great transition. You know, he arced completely. Imagine him from season 1 to where he is now in this last scene with a dressing up. It was amazing. And then Jessica now reconnecting her last scene at the dinner table with her neighbor's kids and his kid. I thought it was a really warm, uplifted ending, which I think, you know, is good for that character. She needs a few breaks from time to time. So I hope she does. I don't know what's going to happen in season 3. I hope she doesn't have to suffer too badly. So
right. You mentioned the jazz. And I wanted to ask you about that because it's something that you've used in your work before, notably in Homeland. So how do you use jazz in this score for this show?
Another great question. I would say harder to answer, but the short answer is one rule I kind of learned early on working with Melissa is, and she really, you can really see it in the imagery of the show. When you look at the offices and when you look at the streets and when you look at the rooms, there's an intimacy to the show. It's not Marvel Universe planetary destruction. It's neighborhoody, if you will. And her world is in this foggy night kind of area, and her office is this sort of character and color. And the orchestration of the show and the feel of the show is more intimate. It's no more than 4 or 5 pieces at a time: piano, electric bass, guitar, often trap drums, and sound design and so forth, or trumpet, or, you know, depending on the thing. But the lines are always very individual. They're always performed. You know, they're played because they have to be very expressive and personal. And it you know, if it ever gets too large, it starts to not feel right for the show. And even in the bigger action cues, I mean, sometimes we have larger sonorities and so forth, but for the most part, when she's running, when she's engaging, especially when she's doing her spycraft, you really have it more of an intimate quintet kind of thing. And I kind of hope maybe in the next year it'd be kind of fun to do a concert. You know how they're doing concerts at the balls, conducting whole movies. I think I think Jessica could be small enough to like go to the Catalina Jazz Club or something and like conduct an episode, like have an episode play and just have a group play it with the sound design. It would take a lot of planning, but I think it would be fun to do.
Well, let's get the ball rolling on that.
Maybe our next interview will be about talking about the upcoming show, but honestly, it's probably 35 minutes of music for an episode. Maybe you'd have to play 2 episodes. I don't know how that would work, but it would be it'd certainly be a lot of fun. It would be a lot of fun.
Right. Talk a bit about the episode that you chose to submit for Emmy consideration. What about that episode stood out for you and made you choose to submit it?
You know, it was tough. I had a fortunate problem this year. I thought there were at least 2 or 3 episodes that I just thought had very fascinating musical challenges and opportunities. The last episode was, to me, just so it culminated a lot of story threads, and it provided a bit of arcing because her relationship with his mother, her relationship with her mother, sort of resolves. I don't want to give it away for people who haven't seen it, but there's some resolution. There's some, you know, some traumatic things that you see that happen rather abruptly. And I remember when I was watching the episode before I started working on just watching it for the first time, you know, some parts of it just took my breath away emotionally because you care for the people on the screen. And so for those reasons, and then just reviewing the show, I just thought it just had a wonderful closing moment for that season, and it provided, the music had a couple of flourishing opportunities that I just thought were unique, and I just honestly it was a very close decision. But I thought that one in the end had the most interesting arcs for each character. Each one sort of goes to their own place. Hogarth starts one place, she ends someplace. Malcolm starts one place, ends another place. Jessica certainly, and they all had to kind of work together and not feel disjointed. So it was actually a very challenging episode to kind of pull together. And at the end of 13 episodes, even though it's Netflix and we're not up against air dates, you still have delivery dates that are as ironclad as ever. So everyone's tired, and so maybe that had something to do with it too. that it was just we felt really good about it. I'm so sorry.
Oh, you're fine. Don't worry.
So low. I'm gonna just unplug this.
Oh, no worries. You're fine. Yeah.
That's riveting Google, isn't it? Me unplugging the phone.
Hacking sometime. No, you're fine.
Yeah.
I was going to say, speaking of deadlines, I mean, you're no stranger to having to work with them because you keep yourself very busy with multiple projects all the time.
Mm-hmm.
How do you balance your workload? How are you able to devote all of yourself to each project since you have so many of them at the same time?
There's a prayer. You know, I kind of I'll tell you what's interesting is when I first started 24, which was 17 years ago. You know, you had one series that went for 22, 24 episodes, and then you had a summer hiatus. And we didn't have streaming media, and we didn't have shows that were constantly in production. Everyone sort of took a collective inhale in June and July. And then what started happening with the arrival of Netflix and streaming media and summer programming on the big networks as well is these little 10-episode shows, seasons, become very compelling. I mean, I've got cues on them in my DVR right now. So thankfully, what's happening is shows are staggered in the year. And another little rule I try to follow, I kind of regard, there were shows I've worked on for several years, like Elementary, and those shows, that Sherlock Holmes show, it's a great show. And now in Homeland, it's in its 7th, now going into its 8th year. So that show is almost like an older sibling. It has its sort of footprint, and there are always things that we do differently to it. But it's different than when you're starting a brand new series that is completely being, the sound is found. So when Jessica came along, for example, I don't think I had any new project that was in front of me, and it was all by itself. And for me personally, you just need that time to sort of find the base of the first dot on the paper, to find the sound of the show. And we do come up against sometimes terrible deadlines, but you just have to plan and pace your writing and be disciplined enough to stay ahead of it. I think the worst my colleagues and I feel, and I can't speak for every colleague, but that horrible dripping feeling of deliveries that are coming and you're way behind is just it's part of the reason why my face has the wrinkles it has on it. But I will say, over this summer, I took about 3 weeks off and just went for a walk in Spain, and so I couldn't be near a computer or a piano if I wanted to. So it requires also the discipline of knowing your limits. And that's a serious thing. You do have to know your limits about when you're being so pushed, and you're so grateful for the work, because really you can't believe when you're working, it's great. But there's times when if it starts to hurt you physically or emotionally, you have to balance your life like you do with anything else.
I'm glad you're able to take some time off to go for a walk.
That normally doesn't happen, and probably will never happen again. It's just that all the shows sort of, the waves parted for just a little bit, so I was able to walk through it. So
now you have a very interesting background among composers, because the very first Emmy nomination you ever got was for sound editing for Star Trek Deep Space Nine.
That's true.
So I'm curious, I mean, how did your work as a sound editor kind of help prepare you to become a composer? I mean, what skills did you take from that you use in this line of work?
Well, first, let me say, if I knew you were going to ask a question about Deep Space Nine, I would have called up my original sounds for the space station and Odo, and I did design some weaponry that I take some credit for, but no, I was part of a team of editors, and that was a great experience. The best part of working on a show like Deep Space Nine as a sound person, even though I was already composing, but I just wasn't working, is you get to see how the mix stages and how the spotting processes work. Because when they're telling a story, and Star Trek was a very, very music intensive and very effects intensive show, and it was superbly written. When you look at those shows on Netflix, they're still pretty beautifully made. They're beautifully made, and they hold up very well. You learn that when you're telling a story, sometimes sound effects are going to take the lead, or sometimes the music's going to take the lead, sometimes the dialogue's going to take the lead. And sometimes they're going to fool around with sliding cues, 2 or 3 frames or 10 frames because it's going to play better, or sometimes they're going to take the music out completely because it's a more powerful moment. Or in the case of me, when I was working sound, I would see Dennis McCarthy score on the stage, and this is back in the multi-track days, so you'd have these large machines that were syncing up the 40-piece orchestra, I believe it was, at least that. And it was fascinating to learn how sound and music work together. I was on the sound side of it, and sometimes I had to learn how to work around score depending on what the challenges were. I mean, in space battles, I mean, just for example, when you're writing, for music in space, I mean, you learn a little bit how all the ingredients of a huge fight scene would work together, and there were certain things that I had to do as a sound editor to stay out of the way of things that were happening musically or dialogue wise. So those were the beginnings of early lessons that were good. The other thing that was, I will say, I don't mean to extend the answer, is sometimes we were on alien ships and I had to design backgrounds that were unsettling. You didn't want to overtly say that when Cisco beamed onto a space station that, oh, we're in a dangerous villainous place, but you'd like to introduce something a little unsettling in the background or in a telemetry reading. So to put those little strokes in there, those little intentions, even in a background or in a small thing, I found had a really interesting effect on the experience when you watched it, even if it wasn't music. So then when I started composing, like on 24 and then Medium and then Homeland, and certainly with Jessica, especially season 2 and Jessica, there were certain sound elements musically that would sort of weave in there. But if there was something unsettling or something warm or something connective between a mother and the daughter, there might be something that you design that would come to you in your head, and you'd kind of weave it in so that it would be part of the score, but you wouldn't as a viewer go, oh, they're having a happy moment. It's just something that I thought about in terms of sound design acting as a part of the score, along with conventional, more time-honored instrumentation like pianos and bass and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. Well, Sean, it's always a pleasure talking to you. Congratulations again on your Emmy nomination.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time.
Sorry for the long answers and for the phone rings and.
No, you're fine. I'll forgive you. So.
Well, I see you on the West Side somewhere. I'm going to on Pico. Congratulations on your move.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I'm sure we'll run into each other one day.
I hope so. Thanks again.
You're welcome. Have a good one.